Good morning and welcome to our next live panel event. So today we are talking about trauma-informed practice. Every month, Thriving Survivors chooses a subject that we're going to be covering for the whole month. And this particular one is a 6-week long project, and it's chosen by the survivors in the focus group at Thriving Survivors. So just before we start, Shumela, can you explain to us, just for anyone that's listening who don't know, what is trauma-informed practice? Oh, you're on mute. Yes, we got that in there early.
Yeah, we did. Let's hope that we don't do it again. Yeah, and just to say, we'll dig really deep into what trauma-informed practice should look and feel like, but in a snapshot, really, trauma-informed practice isn't designed specifically to treat trauma-related difficulties. Instead, it seeks to address the barriers for those that have been affected by trauma that they can experience when accessing different services or the care or support or treatment that they require to maintain a healthy life. And it's argued that those most in need, most likely will also be the hardest to reach and most unlikely to engage with services. And therefore, a trauma-informed lens within your service or trauma-informed practice within your service can really help bring down the barriers and open up your service to those who most need it. In a nutshell, what it is really is your service understanding both the prevalence and the impact of trauma, and then designing itself around that for the needs of those that your service or your organisation serves.
Perfect, thanks, Shumela. So I was just explaining myself to the panel that before coming on, I was looking into this to learn more about it, and didn't appreciate the impact of ongoing trauma when visiting the likes of doctors, early on, calling 999, your interaction with the police, smear tests, etc. There's so much ongoing trauma. So today's panel is just to discuss that whole subject. So to start off, I'm just going to go around the panel and ask you all to introduce yourselves. So I'm just going to go from my left to right. So Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jeremy Indika. I am a child abuse survivor, and I raise awareness for the subject online by sharing my story and just discussing the topic in general using video and other techniques.
Thank you. Pat?
Hi, my name is Pat Mair. I am a CBT therapist, but I'm also the founder of an organisation called Talk Now, which is a trauma-informed organisation.
Thanks, Pat. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Kay, and I'm currently working as a volunteer with Thriving Survivors, and I take the post-traumatic growth program, the Discovering Me program for them currently, and the peer-to-peer groups.
Thanks, Emily. Shumela?
Hi, I'm Shumela Ahmed, and I'm Managing Director at an organisation called the Resilience Learning Partnership. We're a social enterprise and we're a lived experience-led organisation, so we are all survivors through our lived experience, but we also all work within the sector to try and support organisations and services to become both trauma-informed and have lived experience at the centre of that journey of becoming trauma-informed, because it can't be trauma-informed unless it's informed by those with lived experience of trauma. That's one of the most important things about trauma-informed practice.
And we've got Victoria here from Thriving Survivors, who's going to be keeping an eye on Facebook. So if anyone's got any questions they'd like to put to the panel or any comments, please put it in the comments and Victoria will share that with us through the session. So I'm going to ask, first of all, everybody, based on your experience or of those that you represent in your organisation, what are your thoughts on trauma-informed practice? So Shumela, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about our organisation, I often explain it as having a dual purpose. You know, we're a lived experience-led organisation. We support people who have lived experience of trauma, but we also educate and support the sector in that space. And that's how I feel about trauma-informed practice. It's a dual thing for me. I, as a practitioner, it is the greatest tool in my toolbox to be able to be the best educator that I can, but also support the people that I work alongside every day. And that's not just the our staff are survivors, but we also work with people who maybe aren't working for us yet, and they're working in projects and things like that. And I see the benefit that has, and how we're able to bring down barriers, how we're able to form really trusting and healthy relationships with people and keep them engaged and help them get on their healing journey, their recovery pathway, whatever it may be, and however long that may take as well, which often many services aren't set up to do. Our door never closes when someone walks in it. That's it. It's always open to them, regardless. And so all of that is all been designed around trauma-informed practice, and it's all come from survivors themselves who have been very much involved in the system and understand what it feels. The kind of duality for me is experiencing it as a survivor myself as well, and engaging in services or looking for it when I am going to simple services like the GP or the dentist, and feeling a certain way and understanding triggers and why they're happening, and then feeling the difference when you interact with particularly a health professional when it's an intimate exam or something, and you walk away and you go, I was so trauma informed, and and it may be because they're just a really great professional and really great at what they do and have a wonderful bedside manner, but we know not all health professionals have that. And I can see now when I go to different services quite easily who is beginning to understand more about their patient in a room and the person that they're engaging with, through other means. I spent Monday this week speaking to a load of dentists up in Shetland, NHS dentists, about 80 of them, giving them a session on trauma-informed practice and what it looks like. And it was great for us to see about half were on the beginning of this journey. They were just beginning to learn, but a half had already done their homework. They knew about this stuff. They were feeding it into their everyday practice. And, I get to see both sides of the coin. I get to experience it as a survivor and practice it as a practitioner. And that's a really great thing. I get to see all of the great benefits from it. So it means a great deal to me.
Thanks, Shumela. Emily.
Hi, Heather. So yeah, trauma-informed practice for me is, I feel, is really important. My experience with the police, don't get me wrong, they did their best, but they don't recognize that when you're in that situation, that you can't just be honest. It's not as simple as, all you're doing is you're in that moment of, that's my partner, and you want to protect them, even though they're the ones that have done something to you. All you want is the resolution and the conflict to be dispersed. I feel that if they'd been more trauma informed, I would have felt differently more quickly. I'm not saying that it would have changed exactly how I felt about my partner at the time, but if things had been dealt with a bit more gently, that they said, look, this has to happen, this is for your safety, you can't have contact. I completely felt just so isolated as soon as it happened. I was in his house. For him to be removed, it's like, what's going to happen? What's happening to me? And there was no consideration of that at all. So I've also experienced triggers with organizations where they've said, I have to do this, or you need to do this, or you should do this, and panic stations go off straight away. Because, and it's not that the person's done anything wrong or said anything wrong, it's just that those words are found are triggers for me. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that as a survivor, it's now easy for me to pick up on those, because I'm now more trauma informed thanks to thriving survivors and organizations that have been able to help and do trauma informed practice themselves. So I'm discovering a lot more about me as well. So I think trauma informed practice really is for everybody. It's not, it's for survivors as well, to be able to know what exactly triggers them, and for them to grow and be healthier as well.
Thanks, Emily. Pat.
A trauma-informed organisation for me is, I love what was said by both people there. But I think as an organisation, it's very important that everybody in the organisation is that they're aware of the impact of trauma and aware that individuals are all different. and what triggers off somebody might not trigger off somebody else. So within Talk Now, we've had training on that. So that's what we're aware of. When somebody comes in the door, we are aware that they may be suicidal, they may be been treated really badly with other services in the past, and also aware they may have suffered trauma. So within Talk Now, what we do is we try to, first of all, build up a trust. So when somebody comes in to Talk Now, they'll get a cup of tea, have a chit chat, or sometimes when you come in to Talk Now, you don't know who is the person, the client or the counsellor, because that's the environment I wanted to create for anybody that's coming through the doors who has suffered trauma. So we try to create a safety environment as well, where people will feel safe to be able to talk about their stuff. And if you're trauma aware, then you will be able to sort of actively listen to that person, and not put, like Emily says earlier, and not put things upon them, or you will re-traumatize them again. So it's totally being aware of that person and what they've been through in their life. So one of the things for me, I've wrote some stuff down like collaboration, hope, and one of the big things for me is shared power as well. When somebody comes in, that the relationship they have with everybody within Talk Now is equal. So that's very important. Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. Jeremy?
Okay, so you'll have to excuse me for my lack of words, because I'm still trying to understand the term. It's like the first time I've ever been introduced to it. But from what everybody said, yeah, I can really see how this is so just incredibly important for people to be, I suppose, the services to be educated and trained in these areas. I've never really thought about it in reference to things like dentists and, close examinations at the doctors, or maybe even with teachers. I've never really thought about it in those areas. I've only really thought about this type of thing with the police and counsellors and maybe therapists. They're the areas that are immediately come to, I think, probably most people's minds. But the other services where it's maybe intimate is the wrong word, but you're close, or it's that type of interaction. Yeah, well, I can see that this is absolutely necessary, but also something that Emily mentioned that I thought was interesting was, it's almost like it would be nice to push the awareness of how to run this interaction, not only from the person giving the service, maybe the dentist, for example, but the person who's been through the trauma and receiving it, to teach them that, if there are boundaries that they have, maybe to speak about them first, or to understand that it's absolutely in their right and power to be like, hang on a minute, no, or can we just stop there? Or so it's kind of like, maybe it's a two-way relationship. So it's interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So just from going from what everyone's been talking about, obviously it's really important. There's two different things. There is that initial interaction with the likes of the police, and then there's the ongoing trauma through your life, regular things such as dental appointments, any medical care, etc. Does anyone get any experiences from themselves or from those that represent, and not necessarily going into any detail or names, but of an example of what's happened and what's triggered something? I read an article recently about a girl who'd been to the dentist. It was already going to be a traumatic experience for her, and then the dentist actually got on top of her to pull out her tooth, and that was just an horrendous experience for her. Does anyone get any more examples that they're aware of similar things that show that lack of trauma-informed practice? Shumela?
Yeah, and not to be, when we're seeing a lack of trauma-informed practice, so many people are at the beginning of a journey with this, Heather, and it's not about coming at services and criticising them. You know, we've finally got the science to back up what, okay, some of us have known for a long time and parts of the sector have known, but that information hasn't been shared properly. Our systems and our services are set up as systems and services. They're not always set up with human beings and what they've experienced at the forefront. But actually, we ran a focus group a few weeks ago, and something that was really interesting that came out of it was a woman who talked about going for a cervical screening and having the words, just lie down, relax, this isn't going to hurt, being said to her, was exactly what her abuser said to her, literally the same words. And that was, you know, has always been a real triggering point for her. But we done that in a focus group setting where there were professionals in the room able to hear that for the first time, and you just seen the brains going and them going, oh my God, because, you know, when you think of some of the things that are maybe said, really to put someone at ease. And but when we have an awareness of trauma-informed practice, these are the things that we can be really aware of. And Jeremy, I love your suggestion there about it being a two-way street. That's really a lot of the work that my organisation does, because I feel that it is a two-way street, but it can be very difficult to feel empowered enough to speak up and say something like that to a doctor or a GP. That's why it's great to have people with lived experience involved in the training of these individuals and involved in helping redesign some of the services that they might run. So yeah, you know, that those kind of examples are quite prevalent. Actually, the dentist is another one, not because another issue around, you know, another thing around trauma for people is anyone who was sexually abused orally. That's one of the big significant reasons in Scotland for not engaging in oral hygiene and attendance at the dentist. It then trickles down intergenerationally because parents become really anxious and concerned about going to the dentist. They don't take their children, they feel judged. Dentists can often judge. That's some of the work we're trying to kind of get into and trying to help dentists understand that there are many different reasons why someone might not come to the dentist, trauma being a really key one in Scotland.
Thanks, Shumela. Does anyone else want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I would like to sort of share something that happened last week, and I know it happens over and over and over, but I was hoping that things would change because people are talking about trauma more. We're trying to get it out there for people to understand what trauma is, and also to understand that working with people's trauma is going to make the person's life easier, but also theirs as well. But one of the horrific things I heard last week, and I reacted to it, was that somebody had got arrested. A woman had been arrested, and when she went into the cell, they took all her clothes off. And she had told them that she suffers from PTSD, and they took their clothes off her and shut the door. Now, I now know that she should have been given a jogging trousers and a jumper and whatever, but she wasn't, and she was left in there with no clothes on. The impact on that is absolutely horrendous. Absolutely, you know, words don't even cover it for the person. But also, you know, that person had already been through counselling. She was working through a lot of her trauma. So she didn't, you know, she did have an idea how to sort of self-soothe and, you know, regulate her emotions. But when I heard it, you know, for the first time, I was on the phone to the police and saying, what the hell's going on here? This is you know, that maybe 20 years ago, yeah, but not in the here now. So it is still happening. People aren't they're not trauma aware, and it would make everybody's life easier if they were aware of what was going on for that person who has suffered trauma, and what's going on for them just now. So
That's horrendous.
Yeah,
that happens.
Yeah. That's where there can be a lot of tension, particularly in criminal justice. There are some who believe, well, how could we ever have a trauma-informed prison service? Because one of the fundamental principles of trauma-informed practice is choice, and nobody chooses usually to be in prison. They're taken there out with their own control. but it's about once you are in that system or within that service, what things can then actually be done. Examination after sexual assault as well is another real tension point, because again, it's something that has to happen for certain proceedings to take place, but how that takes place, how that examination is conducted, who does it, whether you have choice of male or female, whether you have choice of time of day or place where the examination takes place, the person examining you telling you absolutely everything that's going to happen at every step along the way, a choice of some breaks, things like that. Those, we know from evidence that those really small changes and how the interaction unfolds and what can actually happen, because we often think we're restricted by systems, but sometimes if we dig a wee bit deeper, you know, if we're not breaking the law, if no one's health's going to be damaged, then we can move things around often, and that's what we need to do with trauma-informed practice. We need to be more fluid, we need to be more in a state of actually our service is ever evolving, and it will change as the needs of survivors or those who have experienced trauma changes, as the evidence and how to support people better changes. Our service must change and adapt with that, and not stay stuck in some old model just because that's how things have always been done. You know, one of the things I wanted to make sure I said today was, and I'm so glad, Pat, it's shining right through your training. You touched on at least 3 of the principles. There's 6 key principles in trauma-informed practice. We've got choice, collaboration, empowerment, trust and safety. And the 6th one that's now being added on is culture. So we need to understand the cultural context that trauma happens in, because that can be very complex and difficult to understand for a lot of people. When we think about trauma-informed systems or practices, they work around the 6 R's, and they are, you know, recognising the prevalence of trauma, recognising actually how common it is across society, especially Scottish society, realising that the experiences might have a range of impacts which is relevant to the service that you're delivering for the individual, a real range of different impacts across the board, both mental and physical and social as well. People's spiritual well-being is damaged by trauma. Your service needs to understand that and, you know, realise it within whatever it is that you deliver. It needs to respond in a trauma-informed way. So we're not just talking about being trauma-informed or trauma-aware, we're talking about being trauma-responsive and how your service then responds to the individuals who interact with it. You need to respect resilience. So, you know, Pat, your story there about the women in the cell is just so common. You know, anybody who is in that situation or involved in addiction or in certain activities in society is often treated in a certain way, yet that is the most complex coping mechanism often created by the trauma, and is what is allowing that person to still be standing and breathing today. Not everyone's actually got it in them to be able to adapt that and create that kind of resilience within themselves to still keep going after such a horrific incident that happened, as you're saying there, Pat, to that woman, which I'm sure follows a life of trauma, you know, and she's there keeping it together in a cell, naked, and come out to be able to tell you the story, you know, and is trying to move on from it, as humiliating as it was. Not everybody's capable of that, and of being her trauma that's built up the resilience in her to allow her to be strong enough to get through that and see that there's a brighter light at the end. Relationships matter, they're the key thing. Trauma happens predominantly in relationships, and trauma is healed through relationships. That's how we heal and we move on from the trauma we've experienced. No matter what the question is, the great John Carnochan says, relationships are the answer. They really are, 9 times out of 10. And the most important thing about trauma-informed practice is that it resists re-traumatization. I work with a lot of professionals who are just beginning to realise that some of their practices, procedures, systems and organisations as a whole have actually been traumatising and re-traumatising people for a very, very long time, when actually they thought they were helping. And that's another real good thing that the science can back up for us. And a big thing that needs to change, that's practice, culture, language, everything. and that will take a long, long time. This is going to be a long system change journey. It won't happen overnight, but I just wanted to make sure I got that in before anything else.
Can I just say something else? What we did at Talk Now as well, that because a lot of survivors, when they first come to get help, that they've still lost their voice. You know, there was a lot of people who will sort of lash out and get angry and they respond that way, but there is other people who they find it difficult, and they will be compliant, and they will, you know, but not be able to speak to people and tell them, you know, that this is what happened to me, so this is making me feel uncomfortable. We get cards made, and on the card it says, I am a survivor of trauma, and at the other side it says, please treat me with respect. So the cards have been absolutely amazing for people who are going to the dentist, who are going to the doctors, or, you know, one of the big things is as well, I think for anybody that suffered trauma, is phoning the doctors and, you know, having to tell the receptionist why they're phoning up. That's a big thing for somebody, especially if the person listening they're not trauma informed. Do you know that it's a tough one? It really is. So yeah, I wanted to get that wee bit.
Can I just say a few things? So it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but the basics of this training for services, the basic kind of core values of this idea for the services, seems like it could also be blended a little and taught in schools to children to help with their friendships and relationships, then to teenagers, to university students to help with their friendships. It's just, it seems like it's a lot of it is about just being aware and being considerate.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Sorry, absolutely. You know that when you are doing trauma training, and you are looking, like last night, I looked up some of the trauma stuff again, and you're absolutely right. It is respect for each other and how we should be treating each other. But the problem is, I think, is because people are not aware of the impact that trauma has had on people who have been abused or they've suffered trauma. They're not aware of it, and it's putting that extra bit in, and you know, being aware of it when you're dealing with other organisations, and when they're dealing with maybe somebody that's at Talk Now. You right away, you know whether they're trauma informed or not, just because of the way they're speaking, because of the respect for that person, and also respect for our organisation who's trying to help them as well. So you're aware, but when you phone somebody who's not trauma, oh my goodness, the conversation is completely different. So yeah, it's respect for each other, but it's recognising the impact that trauma has on individuals.
Shumela?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's another area of work that we're in. The really exciting thing about trauma-informed practice in Scotland is that the Scottish Government have really embraced it. And their kind of agenda is that all of the Scottish workforce are trained in at least level 1, which is your trauma aware. And it isn't up until level 2 and 3 and 4 you would ever expect someone to be actually dealing with or addressing the trauma that someone's experiencing. That level 1 is exactly for who you're talking about there. It's for dentist receptionists, GPs receptionists, the pharmacy staff, school catering staff and cleaners, as well as teachers, who you may want some teachers to be level 2 because they may work in certain schools with a high number of young people who have experienced trauma. And kind of just to pick up on what Pat said there as well about, you know, not everyone is aware. The workforce is certainly not aware, but actually many individuals are not aware of the impact trauma has had on them. Many people of a certain generation and of a certain age in Scotland can often say things if they come along to any of our sessions like, oh good, Hayden never done me any wrong when I was away. I mean, my mum and her whole family went to school and they got beat if they ever put a foot out a place, you know, with canes or rulers on the back of their arms or their legs. everyone in Scotland went to school at a point of a certain age where that happened. That's state endorsed trauma. You know, when you look at the care system, what people experience there, but people often of a certain generation, they'll not, you know, they'll be like, no, it never done me any harm, until they begin to learn the impact of trauma, what it looks like, what it might feel like, what that then might come out like within your everyday life. When we talk about behaviours, when we talk about aggression or violence or addiction or depression, you know, things like that, people begin to join the dots. So I've seen people be affected across the board with this, people who have never really experienced any trauma, but we all will experience trauma at one point in our lives. We will all lose someone, and everyone can, I think, empathise with what that feels like. And you know, when we talk about trauma, we have type 1 and type 2. That type 1 is the sudden loss of someone, or an earthquake, or a terrible car accident. Even a rape can be classed as a type 1 trauma. When we talk about type 2 trauma, it's childhood sexual abuse, it's witnessing domestic violence every day, or being subject to domestic violence every day. It's basically type 1 trauma every single day. And then you have many poor souls who experience both intertwined throughout life, a whole lifelong period. And there's many of those individuals walking around in society who have never engaged positively in services, or getting therapy, or the support. And I think simple public health messaging around trauma. There's a great video that I can share with you here, and you can send it out to everyone who's watching today. It's 8.5 minutes long, and it's called Opening Doors, and it beautifully explains what trauma is and how services can be trauma informed and what it might look like to everyone. But as it ends, it talks beautifully about this is all of us. It's not just some of us. That trauma could happen to any of us. And many people are walking about having experienced significant trauma and haven't found the space or safety to be able to share that. And I think through this, kind of being able to talk about this in spaces like this so freely, with this going out live, can really help a lot of people. Just to, you know, I can share some great resources that people can go and get a look at and learn more about this stuff, and what's going on in Scotland, and how they can maybe find a trauma-informed service near them.
Fantastic, thanks, Shumela.
Sorry, Heather.
Yeah,
no, I love Gabor Mate. I've seen his trailer for The Wisdom of Trauma. And just touching on that, one of the things that he said was that during the war, somebody went to the doctor with their baby because their baby kept crying, and the doctor said all the babies are crying because the parents are stressed. So it's not just, it's how trauma filters through other people. Also, there was something that I read on Facebook. Somebody's little girl was getting bullied, and they were saying where are the teachers, and it's like, well, we need to establish why and where that behavior has come from. And I think often we're so quick to judge someone else's behavior without looking at the reason behind that, which is quite possibly trauma. And as Shumela said, it's being able to empathize and look at things objectively on both sides.
Definitely. That brings us actually quite well onto the next question. So Victoria's got a question from Facebook from a teacher.
So he's just gave us a wee description first. So he's a teacher and he's part of the team responsible for supporting health and wellbeing in general, and as part of that, helping to make these working in and attending schools in Inverclyde more trauma informed. The expectation is that this support will contribute towards closing the poverty-related attainment gap. So you'd like to ask the panel, is there any examples from your school days, whether a specific incident or the general experience where trauma-informed practice would have made a difference? Would be great to hear.
Who would like to come in first to that? Shumela?
Yeah, I've got a really good example actually. When I went into care age 12, I think I was in first year or just going into second year. And you know, it happened very quickly, and I was in, and I was back at school a week later, sent in a taxi. and not a single teacher, apart from one, even took me aside or, you know, had a meeting with me. It's very, very different now in schools. As soon as a young person goes into care, you know, all sorts of kind of provision usually should be put in place quite quickly. And the schools are actually really good at being switched on. That teacher's role, health and well-being, it tells you that. There wasn't anything like that when I was at school. But I had one teacher, and he was from Govan in Glasgow, and he had grew up probably in quite, you know, hard circumstances, and he followed teaching. He was a great guy, and he knew the troubles I was going through. He knew what was going on at home. You know, I came from a home who had alcoholics, and he was aware of that. He knew why I'd went into care, but no one else even really, they didn't bat an eyelid. I'm sure some paperwork was filled out and all of that, but and that was the time for me, because, you know, after that, the rails just, you know, I went right off the rails. I left school at 14, and so much could have been done if, you know, a small team had come round me in the school, if I'd maybe been given a wee bit of support, with schoolwork, with, you know, the fact I had to go humiliatingly in a taxi to school, all of that. Everybody knew, all my peers. It was a great opportunity for trauma-informed practice, and something that very much didn't happen. But, you know, I'm a bit older and I went to school a while ago. I would like to think that things have moved on significantly there, and teachers' knowledge of what their pupils are experiencing outside the classroom is increasing. We've got some student teachers working for us, and they've just about to complete their degrees at Stirling Uni, and they were learning about trauma-informed practice, and how it relates to different aspects of what they're learning within their degrees. I was dead pleased to hear that, actually, and that was just last year.
Thanks, Shumela.
I think as well, sorry, can I just come in as well? I think it's teachers being aware. I'm thinking of myself when I was at school, and I'll go back to that in a minute. But I think it's teachers being aware of the impact of on a child when they are suffering trauma, or they have suffered trauma before, you know, earlier on. And what's happening to their brain. So I'll just tell you briefly what happens to a child when they have suffered trauma. There is a part of their brain that closes down. Now that's a coping strategy to make sure that they're safe. Unfortunately, that part is shut down as the learning part on them learning who they are and also learning at school. Now that's just a brief sort of thing. I don't want to get into too much of that. So when you're, you know, a kid at school who is suffering trauma, they will be the child who's sitting looking out the window, or they're not, you know, they don't look as if they might even be disassociating. They might not be able to, you know, repeat back to you what you says to them. So I think it's recognising the impact that trauma can have in a child, and being aware of that if there is somebody in your class that's going through that, and that's what they're doing. When I think of myself, when I was at school, I was that child who looked out the window and couldn't take anything in at all, and grew up and thought I was stupid. So it's you know, being aware of that, and you know, sort of like Shilpa says, that there was somebody who recognised that she was going through a tough time. So it's recognising that and giving that child, the teacher might be the person who's going to be able to do that for them, giving them a platform to be able to trust them, to be able to talk and maybe get it out, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, just to add to that as well, you know, one of the most significant things when we think about children and young people in relation to trauma or adverse childhood experiences is the significance of one steady, healthy adult relationship, consistent in their lives. And teachers have the beautiful privilege of being able to be that for many young people. We know that some young people who have experienced the most adverse experiences and the most horrific traumas have been able to come out school on the other end because they've had that one teacher who believes in them, who's always stood by them, who goes the extra mile to kind of, you know, talk up for them or stand by them when things might get difficult. That's a real live example of what teachers can do in their everyday practice. If you're aware of a young person in your classroom is experiencing trauma, maybe not be so hard on the academic side of things, and understand what Pat said, that anyone experiencing trauma, their brain will be impacted to a level, and children even more so, and the learning part of the brain just isn't working properly. That the brain's making the rest of the body and brain survive, and it's working really hard to make sure that that's happening. And school can often be, for some young people, the only safe and secure place that they have. It can be the only place that they get a square meal in the day, and it can be the only place that they see and have access to healthy relationships. So teachers have a huge part to play in helping alleviate and being one of the buffers in a young person's life, because we know the significant contribution that can have, and they end up very important.
Jeremy?
Is there anything in the trauma-informed training program or the scheme or the approach of it that asks from the people who are being trained whether they are survivors of some sort of severe trauma? Because I can imagine that for some people, receiving the trauma-informed training is actually somewhat healing for them to understand more about it. But I can also imagine for another type of personality, it could be triggering for them. So I'd just be interested to know if there's anything in the training scheme for that.
Clearly, one of the most significant things about trauma-informed practice as well, and that big organisations can often forget, is it's not just outwardly projecting. So you're not just being trauma-informed for those your organisation serves. You need to be trauma-informed for those who work in your organisation, and that includes being aware that anyone in your organisation could have experienced trauma, but also things like vicarious trauma, which is very common in this sector, particularly for people working with survivors who hear day after day other people's traumas and who may not have experienced them themselves but can become vicariously traumatized. So trauma-informed practice looks to embed all of that knowledge, not just in the services and policies we have outwardly projecting, but the ones that we have internally for our staff and the people who run and work within our organisations. That's very, very important within trauma-informed practice.
Thank you.
Can I just come in there, Heather? Sorry, just to answer Jeremy's question as well. I think, Jeremy, that if anybody, is going to be doing a course in trauma, and they have suffered a lot of trauma themselves, self-awareness is a fantastic tool for them to be able to manage participating in a trauma course. So they would, for me, they would have to have some awareness of how trauma has affected them, and it's, if they've got that knowledge of how trauma has affected them and how it affects them every day in life, they'll know then that their reactions, like say it might be body reactions, it might be the thoughts, it might be the behaviors, whatever is happening for them, that they'll understand that is because of the trauma that they suffered when they were a child. So you're right, it can be very healing, but there has to be some knowledge of the impact of how trauma had affected them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, fantastic.
That's why we have the different levels. So it goes from level 1 to level 4. And level 1 is very much that level that the Scottish Government want the whole public workforce to be educated in. Therefore, we are talking about people like cleaners or receptionists whose job it's not their job to even work with people who have experienced trauma. They're maybe greeting them as they come in, or they might be serving them. That's the very low level of the creating the awareness of everybody experiences trauma. This is what it looks like. This is what it might look like, sound like. This is what it might feel like, without taking people too deep down the path where they would have the expectation that they were then meant to do something about that trauma in an individual. Then when you go up to level 2, that's when you would start giving that to people who are actually known to be coming into contact with people who have lived experience of trauma. And that too goes right through from people like support workers to police officers and then you go up to 3 for skilled, and then 4 is for specialists. So I wouldn't even do 4 because I'm not a mental health professional, I'm an educator. That's for psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health nurses, and so varying degrees, and something for everyone. I believe we've devised some community workshops that takes this right out to people living in certain communities within Scotland, to begin to start to talk about trauma at a community level, because what we have community trauma as well. We have people who live in communities that they're traumatized by living where they live, not actually by what's going on in their house, but they walk out their door, they see gang violence or drugs or addiction, or there's a lot of high crime in the area. These things traumatize people as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to go on to our last question here, and this is to kind of sum up the panel. And when asking it, there's a couple of things that just from other questions that are come in from the public, to try and see if you can incorporate them into it as well, just so we don't keep you guys here too long. So the final question would be, what do you think can be done better? And when answering this, there, maybe consider as well, one of the questions we had in was how people and survivors consider whether, at what level their trauma is, how worthy it is. And when they put how worthy their trauma is, how bad it was, other people automatically do the same, be it police, teachers, doctors. So yeah, and why is it important? Why is it so important? And maybe if anyone knows as well, is there anything, is there a requirement for it just now? Should it be a legal requirement for certain organisations? So really just an overview from everybody, but what you think should be done better and why, taking in those points. So I will start with Pat.
That's a good question, actually. What right away when you say what should be done better, the first thing that comes into my head is training, definitely training for within the NHS. Now I'm a trainer. I train people how to work with trauma and sexual abuse. And I've got a wee, like Shilpa was saying as well, I've got a wee video, it might be the same one as you've got, where I have been over to the NHS, and I just assume that they've seen this, because this was given to me from the NHS, and how they were going to take it all the way around. I was at training in Edinburgh, so they were going to take it all round the NHS. And let people see this video, which is excellent, absolutely excellent, how to work with trauma. I'm actually surprised how many people, oh no, I've not seen that. Oh, right, okay, you're going to see it now, and putting it on. So I am surprised that, you know, that the first thing that comes to my head, definitely the things that has to change is training. However, I'm also looking at the other side for the survivor themselves, when they're going through counselling or they're going through whatever they need to go through to get their lives back. Is for us in Talk Now, we realised that every survivor who has suffered trauma, there has to be psychoeducation for them. They have to be, you know, they have to know that everything that they do is maybe because of their trauma, and it's okay. And it's okay. So some people might come in and they'll think they're stupid, they think they're weak, they think, you know, they've got other labels that they put on themselves. But not only them, I think psychological services and other people put these labels on them as well. But if you explain to them the reason that they're still doing that is because of the trauma that they suffered as a child. So I think with educating the person on what's going on for them, you know, that the reasons they do things, or the reasons that you know, that their behaviours is because of that, then that helps people to recover a bit quicker, which is good when they realise that. So I'm also thinking that, you know, the more people who have suffered trauma do get psychoeducation, then they will, no demand, that's quite a strong word, but they will, you know, sort of say, no, this is what I deserve and this is what I need. And, you know, they will find their voice to be able to tell, to say to organisations who's not trauma informed, who haven't got you know, they haven't got a clue that somebody is actually suffering trauma. So there's a lot. That was a good question. So there's a lot in that one. So yeah.
Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I agree with everything that Pat had to say there as well. But for me, I think the biggest thing is that it doesn't matter how small a trauma is, it's trauma, and that's everybody is worthy. And I think the fact that trauma is now becoming recognized, people are seeing different patterns of behaviors. It might not be the same for everybody, but there will be a certain pattern that forms because as a result of trauma, and it's recognizing those patterns, and then we can pinpoint that. Because I've got friends who would say, I'm okay, I'm so jealous that you've come so far and you're in recovery, because like I feel like sometimes my emotions aren't recognized and things, and I'll say to them, it's possible that you have, but it's just things are downplayed so much by society that they think wasn't that bad, that it's, you know, such and such has had such and such happen to them. And I think that's the danger. It's recognizing that no trauma is small. It's, you know, anything could be a big thing to somebody else. If you're having a happy life and you're skipping down the road and all of a sudden you break your knee, and you want to be a ballet dancer, that's horrific, because that's life changing. You know, it's not just a small thing. And so I think it's how we approach how different people's trauma affects them. It's nothing is too small, it's all worthy.
Thanks, Emily. Jeremy?
Just in response, to add to what Emily said, I completely agree. I think we are focusing too much attention on trying to rate the event that happened that caused the trauma, when I think more focus should be on the person's reaction to the event, because the event could be anything, but depending on the personality type or the way that person is, or the circumstances that person were in at the time, or the age that they were, and many other factors, it's actually the reaction inside of the person that's crucial, not the actual event. So yeah, it's society's way of downplaying certain things and up leveling certain things is not, I don't believe, is we're on the right track with that. So yeah.
Shumela, to end with you.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, you know, the number one thing to remember about trauma is it is not about the event, it is about how the event is experienced by the individual. And that's why triggers are such, you know, nuanced little things, because what may be traumatizing to me and triggering to me may not be to you. And it's really, really important for us to remember that and never get into a space where we're measuring trauma, because that's not where we want to go. And that's how I feel about what needs to be better, as well as, you know, there can often be a lot of criticism of organisations. I'll put my hand up and say I'm the first to do it when I see something that needs to be criticised, but I also navigate a space that's trying to convince leaders and organisation leaders and the powers that be that this is the right thing for their organisation. And when we talk about putting trauma informed into an organisation, you know, one of the things I identified really quickly about 3 or 4 years ago was that it was all sitting in mental health. And I was like, well, why? Because that's actually really stigmatizing, because that's not all trauma affects. It doesn't only affect your mental health, it affects your physical health, it affects your social capital, it affects your prospects, it affects the standards of your education and, you know, all of your financial. So it needs to bleed into every area of public life that is publicly funded and that is decided by public policy areas. So, you know, we're working with housing associations. I want to see trauma-informed commissioning. This is how aspirational I am. I want them to be thinking about how else does your business, your organisation interact with people, and how else can it be trauma-informed. This isn't just about the coal face, the worker on the front line. This is about your systems, your processes, how your staff are trained, how you recruit, what people, you know, the values you hold in the people you recruit. Do we just care about a degree or qualifications, or do we want to know about the human in front of us that's coming to work in our organisation, what their values are, what they care about, what they've experienced themselves? Find out a bit about your staff, get your HR staff trained in trauma-informed practice. Look at what in the HR system is really re-traumatising, you know, the power imbalances. We talk about things like introducing a domestic violence policy, which is quite in just now for employment people. But when you really talk about making that a trauma-informed policy, you get the resistance of, you know, usual stuff around HR and time off, and everybody will want the same and all of that. And maybe that's an indication of how prevalent domestic violence is in the UK. But that's another Facebook Live event. The fundamental thing, I think, about everything, and if I can just say one last wee thing, is people with lived experience are at the heart, or should be at the heart, of any trauma-informed practice or plans for service redesign. That is truly what needs to be done better. If we can include people better, if we can shift the power a bit better and convince more leaders that this is the right thing to do, then we'll have those individuals at the centre, and any service who adopts that way of approaching trauma-informed practice will really get it right for their service, because it's those who access our services who should decide ultimately if it's trauma-informed, not us. It's not up to us to say.
Thanks so much, everybody, for taking part in today's panel. Anyone that was watching, thank you for your questions, and we'll try to have a look at any that haven't been answered and come back to you on that. And if you do want to talk any further, you can drop us a message and we'll get in touch. Have a look through this month's social, and there's more to come with examples and information, blogs and vlogs from survivors and experts. And we'll see you within the next 6 weeks for our next live panel, and the next subject we'll be going to in September is good practice in the third sector. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and we will see you next month.